I'm back. I forgot the last 2 weeks. I totally forgot. I was doing things. It's hard in the summer because I've been going to visit my parents. They live a little ways away from where I live, so it's like a weekend trip. And when I go there, I forget to bring Harry Potter, and then I'm busy swimming in a lake, and then I forget to read to you guys. So my apologies. Sorry about that. Anyways, let's get on with it. How the hell are you guys? Good to see you. Everything's well. I don't know. It's Sunday. It's really hot outside. I had a freezy before this, and I might eat a freezy after this because when you buy freezies, they don't last very long in my fridge. Anyways, let's go. We're on to chapter 13. Nicholas Flamel. Please enjoy my reading. Commencing immediately. Dumbledore had convinced Harry not to go looking for the mirror of... What's this word? Irizid? Again, and for the rest of the Christmas holidays, the invisibility cloak stayed folded at the bottom of his trunk. Harry wished he could forget what he'd seen in the mirror as easily, but he couldn't. He started having nightmares. Over and over again, he dreamed about his parents disappearing in a flash of green light while a high voice crackled with laughter. You see, Dumbledore was right. That mirror could drive you mad, said Ron, when Harry told him about these dreams. Hermione, who came back the day before term started, took a different view of things. She was torn between horror at the idea of Harry being out of bed, roaming the school 3 nights in a row, if Filch had caught you, and disappointment that he hadn't at least found out who Nicholas Flamel was. By the way, this is chapter 13, Nicholas Flamel. They had almost given up hope of ever finding Flamel in a library book, even though Harry was still sure he'd read the name somewhere. Once term had started, they were back to skimming through books for 10 minutes during their breaks. Harry had even less time than the other two because Quidditch practice had started again. Wood was working the team harder than ever. Even the endless rain that had replaced the snow couldn't dampen his spirits. The Weasleys complained that Wood was becoming a fanatic, but Harry was on Wood's side. If they won their next match against Hufflepuff, they would overtake Slytherin in the house championship for the first time in 7 years. Quite apart from wanting to win, Harry found that he had fewer nightmares when he was tired out after training. Then, during one particularly wet and muddy practice session, Wood gave the team a bit of bad news. He just got very angry with the Weasleys, who kept dive-bombing each other and pretending to fall off their brooms. "Will you stop messing around?" he yelled. "That's exactly the sort of thing that'll lose us the match. Snape's refereeing this time, and he'll be looking for any excuse to knock points off Gryffindor." Well, George Weasley really did fall off his broom at those words. Snape's refereeing? He sputtered through a mouthful of mud. When's he ever refereed a Quidditch match? He's not going to be fair if we might overtake Slytherin. The rest of the team landed next to George to complain too. "It's not my fault," said Wood. "We've just got to make sure we play a clean game so Snape hasn't got an excuse to pick on us." Which was all very well, thought Harry, but he had another reason for not wanting Snape near him while he was playing Quidditch. The rest of the team hung back to talk to each other as usual at the end of practice, but Harry headed straight back to the Gryffindor common room, where he found Ron and Hermione playing chess. Chess was the only thing Hermione ever lost at, something Harry and Ron thought was very good for her. "Don't talk to me for a moment," said Ron, when Harry sat down next to him. "I need to concentrate." He caught sight of Harry's face. "What's the matter with you? You look terrible." Speaking quietly so that no one else would hear, Harry told the other two about Snape's sudden, sinister desire to be a Quidditch referee. "Don't play," said Hermione at once. "Say you're ill," said Ron. "Pretend to break your leg," Hermione suggested. "Really, break your leg," said Ron. "I can't," said Harry. "There isn't a reserve seeker. If I back out, Gryffindor can't play at all." At that moment, Neville toppled into the common room. Now he had managed to climb through the portrait hole was anyone's guess. How he, had managed to climb through the portrait hole was anyone's guess, because his legs had been stuck together with what they recognized as once as a leg locker curse. He must have had to bunny hop all the way to Gryffindor Tower. Everyone fell about laughing except Hermione, who leapt up and performed the counter curse. Neville's legs sprang apart and got to his feet, trembling. "What happened?" Hermione asked him, leading him over to sit with Harry and Ron. "Malfoy," said Neville shakily. "I met him outside the library. He said he'd been looking for someone to practice on." "Go to Professor McGonagall," Hermione urged Neville. "Report him." Neville shook his head. "I don't want more trouble," he mumbled. "You've got to stand up to him, Neville," said Ron. He's used to walking all over people, but that's no reason to lie down in front of him and make it easier. There's no need to tell me I'm not brave enough to be in Gryffindor. Malfoy's already done that, Neville choked. Harry felt in the pocket of his robes and pulled out a chocolate frog, the very last one from the box Hermione had given him for Christmas. He gave it to Neville, who looked as though he might cry. You're worth 12 of Malfoy, Harry said. That sorting hat chose you for Gryffindor, didn't it? And where's Malfoy? And stinking Slytherin. Neville's lips twitched in a weak smile as he unwrapped the frog. Thanks, Harry. I think I'll go to bed. Do you want the card? You collect them, don't you? As Neville walked away, Harry looked at the famous wizard card. Dumbledore again, he said. He was the first one I ever... He gasped. He stared at the back of the card. Then he looked up at Ron and Hermione. I found him, he whispered. I found Flamel. I told you I'd read the name somewhere before. I read it on the train coming here. Listen to this. Professor Dumbledore is particularly famous for his defeat of the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945, for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood, and his work on alchemy with his partner, Nicodemus Flamel. Hermione jumped to her feet. She hadn't looked so excited since they got back the marks for their very first piece of homework. Stay there, she said, and she sprinted up the stairs to the girls' dormitories. Harry and Ron barely had time to exchange mystified looks before she was dashing back an enormous old book in her arms. I never thought to look in here, she whispered excitedly. I got this out of the library weeks ago for a bit of light reading. Light, said Ron. But Hermione told him to be quiet until she looked something up and started flicking frantically through the pages, muttering to herself. At last she found what she was looking for. I knew it! I knew it! Are we allowed to speak yet? Said Ron grumpily. Hermione ignored him. Nicholas Flamel, she whispered dramatically, is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. This didn't quite have the effect she'd expected. The what? Said Harry and Ron. Oh, honestly, don't you two read? Look, read that, there. She pushed the book towards them, and Harry and Ron read. The ancient study of alchemy is concerned with making the Philosopher's Stone, a legendary substance with astonishing powers. The stone will transform any metal into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal. There have been many reports of the Philosopher's Stone over the centuries, but the only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicholas Flamel, the noted alchemist and opera lover. Mr. Flamel, who celebrated his 665th birthday last year, enjoys a quiet life in Devon with his wife, Pernelli. 658? See, said Hermione when Harry and Ron finished. The dog must be guarding Flamel's Philosopher's Stone. I bet he asked Dumbledore to keep it safe for him, because they're friends and he knew someone was after it. That's why he wanted the stone moved out of Gringotts. A stone that makes gold and stops you from ever dying, said Harry. No wonder Snape's after it. Anyone would want that. And no wonder we couldn't find Flamel in the study of recent developments in wizardry, said Ron. He's not exactly recent if he's 665, is he? Next morning, in defense against the dark arts, while copying down different ways of treating werewolf bites, Harry and Ron were still discussing what they'd do with a Philosopher's Stone if they had one. It wasn't until Ron said he'd buy his own Quidditch team that Harry remembered about Snape and the coming match. I'm going to play, he told Ron and Hermione. If I don't, all the Slytherins will think I'm just too scared to face Snape. I'll show them. It'll really wipe the smiles off their faces if we win. Just as long as we're not wiping you off the pitch, said Hermione. As the match drew nearer, however, Harry became more and more nervous. Whatever he told Ron and Hermione, the rest of the team weren't too calm either. The idea of overtaking Slytherin in the House Championship was wonderful, but no one had done it for nearly 7 years. But would they be allowed to with such a biased referee? Harry didn't know whether he was imagining it or not, but he seemed to keep running into Snape wherever he went. At times, he wondered whether Snape was following him, trying to catch him on his own. Potion lessons were turning into a sort of weekly torture. Snape was so horrible to Harry. Could Snape possibly know they'd found out about the Philosopher's Stone? Harry didn't see how he could, yet he sometimes had this horrible feeling that Snape could read minds. Harry knew, when they wished him good luck outside the changing rooms next afternoon, that Ron and Hermione were wondering whether they'd ever see him alive again. This wasn't what you'd call comforting. Harry hardly heard a word of Wood's pep talk as he pulled on his Quidditch robes and picked up his Nimbus 2000. Ron and Hermione, meanwhile, had found a place in the stands next to Neville, who couldn't understand why they looked so grim and worried or why they had both brought their wands to the match. Little did Harry know that Ron and Hermione had been secretly practicing the leg locker curse. They'd got the idea from Malfoy using it on Neville and were ready to use it on Snape if he showed any signs of wanting to hurt Harry. Now, don't forget, it's locomotor motus, Hermione muttered as Ron slipped his wand up his sleeve. I know, Ron snapped. Don't nag. Back in the changing room, Wood had taken Harry aside. Don't want to pressure you, Potter, but if we ever need an early capture of the snitch, it's now. Finish the game before Snape can favor Hufflepuff too much. The whole school's out there, said Fred Weasley, peering out the door. Even blimey Dumbledore's come to watch. Harry did a somersault. Dumbledore, he said, dashing to the door to make sure. Fred was right. There was no mistaking that silver beard. Harry could have laughed out loud with relief. He was safe. There was simply no way that Snape would dare to try and hurt him if Dumbledore was watching. Perhaps that was why Snape was looking so angry as the teams marched onto the pitch, something that Ron noticed too. I've never seen Snape look so mean, he told Hermione. Look, they're off. Ouch! Someone had poked Ron in the back of the head. It was Malfoy. Oh, sorry, Weasley, didn't see you there. Malfoy grinned broadly at Crabbe and Goyle. Wonder how long Potter's going to stay on his broom this time. Anyone want to bet? What about you, Weasley? Ron didn't answer. Snape had just awarded Hufflepuff a penalty because George Weasley had hit a bludger at him. Hermione, who had all her fingers crossed in her lap, was squinting fixedly at Harry, who was circling the game like a hawk looking for the snitch. You know how I think they choose people for the Gryffindor team, said Malfoy loudly. A few minutes later, as Snape awarded Hufflepuff another penalty for no reason at all. It's people they feel sorry for. See? There's Potter, who's got no parents. Then there's the Weasleys, who've got no money. You should be on the team, Longbottom. You've got no brains. Neville went bright red, but turned in his seat to face Malfoy. I'm worth 12 of you, Malfoy, he stammered. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle howled with laughter, but Ron, still not daring to take his eyes from the game, said, You tell him, Neville. Longbottom, if brains were gold, you'd be poorer than Weasley, and that's saying something. Ron's nerves were already stretched to the breaking point with anxiety about Harry. I'm warning you, Malfoy. One more word. Ron, said Hermione suddenly. Harry, what? Where? Harry had suddenly gone into a spectacular dive, which drew gasps and cheers from the crowd. Hermione stood up, her fingers crossed in her mouth as Harry streaked towards the ground like a bullet. You're in luck, Weasley. Potter's obviously spotted some money on the ground, said Malfoy. Ron snapped. Before Malfoy knew what was happening, Ron was on top of him, wrestling him to the ground. Neville hesitated, then clambered over the back of his seat to help. Come on, Harry, Hermione screamed, leaping onto her seat to watch as Harry sped straight at Snape. She didn't even notice Malfoy and Ron rolling around under her seat or the scuffles and yelps coming from the whirl of fists that was Neville, Crabbe, and Goyle. Up in the air, Snape turned on his broomstick just in time to see something scarlet shoot past him, missing him by inches. Next second, Harry had pulled out of the dive, his arm raised in triumph, the snitch clasped in his hand. The stands erupted. It had to be a record. No one could ever remember the snitch being caught so quickly. Ron, where are you? The game's over. Harry's won. We've won. Gryffindor are in the lead, shrieked Hermione. Dancing up and down on her seat and hugging Pavarti Petal in the front row, Harry jumped off his broom a foot from the ground. He couldn't believe it. He'd done it. The game was over. It had barely lasted 5 minutes. As Gryffindors came spilling onto the pitch, he saw Snape land nearby, white-faced and tight-lipped. Then Harry felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up into Dumbledore's smiling face. Well done, said Dumbledore quietly, so that only Harry could hear. Nice to see you haven't been brooding about the mirror. Been keeping busy. Excellent. Snape spat bitterly on the ground. Harry left the changing room alone, sometime later, to take his Nimbus 2000 back to the broom shed. He couldn't ever remember feeling happier. He'd really done something to be proud of now. No one could say he was just a famous name anymore. The evening air had never smelled so sweet. He walked over the damp grass, reliving the last hour in his head, which was a happy blur. Gryffindors running to lift him onto their shoulders. Ron and Hermione in the distance jumping up and down. Ron cheering through a heavy nosebleed. Harry had reached the shed. He leant against the wooden door and looked up at the Hogwarts with its windows glowing red in the setting sun. Gryffindor in the lead. He'd done it. He'd shown Snape. And speaking of Snape, a hooded figure came swiftly down the front steps of the castle. Clearly not wanting to be seen, it walked as fast as possible towards the Forbidden Forest. Harry's victory faded from his mind as he watched. He recognized the figure's prowling walk. Snape, sneaking into the forest while everyone else was at dinner. What was going on? Harry jumped back on his Nimbus 2000 and took off. Gliding silently over the castle, he saw Snape enter the forest at a run. He followed. The trees were so thick he couldn't see where Snape had gone. He flew in circles, lower and lower, brushing the top branches of trees until he heard voices. He glided towards them and landed noiselessly in a towering beech tree. He climbed carefully along one of the branches, holding tight to his broomstick, trying to see through the leaves. Below, in a shadowy clearing, stood Snape, but he wasn't alone. Quirrell was there too. Harry couldn't make out the look on his face, but he was stuttering worse than ever. Harry strained to catch what they were saying. Don't know why you wanted to meet here of all places, Severus. Oh, I thought we'd keep this private, said Snape, his voice icy. Students aren't supposed to know about the Philosopher's Stone, after all. Harry leant forward. Quirrell was mumbling something. Snape interrupted him. Have you found out how to get past that beast of Hagrid's yet? But Severus, You don't want me as your enemy, Quirrell, said Snape, taking a step towards him. I don't know what you know perfectly well what I mean. An owl hooted loudly, and Harry nearly fell out of the tree. He steadied himself in time to hear Snape say, Your little bit of hocus pocus, I'm waiting. But I don't... Very well, Snape cut in. We'll have another little chat soon when you've had time to think things over and decided where your loyalties lie. He threw his cloak over his head, and strode out of the clearing. It was almost dark now, but Harry could see Quirrell standing quite still as though he was petrified. Harry, where have you been? Hermione squeaked. We won! You won! We won! Shouted Ron, thumping Harry on the back. And I gave Malfoy a black eye, and Neville tried to take on Crabbe and Goyle single-handed. He's still out cold, but Madame Pomfrey says he'll be all right. Talk about showing Slytherin. Everyone's waiting for you in the common room. We're having a party. Fred and George stole some cakes and stuff from the kitchens. Never mind that now, said Harry breathlessly. Let's find an empty room. You wait till you hear this. He made sure Peeves wasn't inside before shutting the door behind him. Then he told them what he'd seen and heard. So we were right. It is the Philosopher's Stone. And Snape's trying to force Quirrell to help him get it. He asked if he knew how to get past Fluffy, and he said something about Quirrell's hocus pocus. I reckon there are other things guarding the stone apart from Fluffy, loads of enchantments. Probably, and Quirrell would have done some anti-dark art spell which Snape needs to break through. So you mean the stone's only safe as long as Quirrell stands up to Snape? Said Hermione in alarm. It'll be gone by next Tuesday, said Ron. Oh, that's the end of chapter 13, but guess what? We're going through chapter 14 too. Let's do 2. Why the hell not? That was a short one. I've got 15 minutes. I can talk fast. Quirrell, however, must have been braver than they'd thought. In the weeks that followed, he did seem to be getting paler and thinner, but it didn't look as though he'd cracked yet. Every time they passed the third-floor corridor, Harry, Ron, and Hermione could press their ears to the door to check that Fluffy was still growling inside. Snape was sweeping about in his usual bad temper, which surely meant that the stone was still safe. Whenever Harry passed Quirrell these days, he gave him an encouraging sort of smile, and Ron had started telling people off for laughing at Quirrell's stutter. Hermione, however, had more on her mind than the Philosopher's Stone. She had started drawing up revision timetables and color-coding all of her notes. Harry and Ron wouldn't have minded, but she kept nagging them to do the same. Hermione, the exams are ages away. 10 weeks, Hermione snapped. That's not ages, that's like a second to Nicholas Flamel. But you're not 600 years old, Ron reminded her. Anyway, what are you revising for? You already know it all. What am I revising for? Are you mad? You realize we need to pass these exams to get into the second year. They're very important. I should have started studying a month ago. I don't know what's got into me. Unfortunately, the teachers seem to be thinking along the same lines as Hermione. Dragon eggs. They piled so much homework on them that the Easter holidays weren't nearly as much fun as the Christmas ones. It was hard to relax with Hermione next to you, reciting the 12 uses of dragon's blood or practicing wand movements. Moaning and yawning, Harry and Ron spent most of their free time in the library with her, trying to get through all their extra work. I'll never remember this, Ron burst out one afternoon, throwing down his quill and looking longingly out of the library window. It was the first really fine day they'd had in months. The sky was clear, forget-me-not blue, and there was a feeling in the air of summer coming. Harry, who was looking up Dittany and 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, didn't look up until he heard Ron say, Hagrid, what are you doing in the library? Hagrid shuffled into view, hiding something behind his back. He looked very out of place in his moleskin overcoat. Just looking, he said, in a shifty voice that got their interest at once. And what are you a lot up to? He looked suddenly suspicious. You're not still looking for Nicholas Flamel, are you? Oh, we found out who he is ages ago, said Ron impressively, and we know that dog's guarding. It's a philosopher's Shh! Hagrid looked around quickly to see if anyone was listening. Don't go shouting about it. What's the matter with you? There are a few things we wanted to ask you, as a matter of fact, said Harry, about what's guarding the stone apart from Fluffy. Shh, said Hagrid again. Listen, come and see me later. I'm not promising I'll tell you anything, mind, but don't go rabbiting about it here. Students aren't supposed to know. I think I've told you. See you later then, said Harry. Hagrid shuffled off. Was he hiding behind his back, said Hermione thoughtfully. Do you think it had anything to do with the stone? I'm going to see what section he was in, said Ron, who'd had enough of working. He came back a minute later with a pile of books in his arms and slammed them down on the table. Dragons, he whispered. Hagrid was looking up stuff about dragons. Look at these, dragon species of Great Britain and Ireland, from Egg to Inferno, a dragon keeper's guide. Hagrid always wanted a dragon, he told me, so the first time I ever met him, said Ron. But it's against our laws, said Ron. Dragon breeding was outlawed by the Warlocks Convention of 1709. Everyone knows that. It's hard to stop muggles noticing us if we're keeping dragons in the back garden. Anyway, you can't tame dragons. It's dangerous. You should see the burns Charlie's got off the wild ones in Romania. But aren't there wild dragons in Britain, said Harry. Of course there are, said Ron. Common Welsh green and Hebridean blacks. The Ministry of Magic has a job hushing them up, I can tell you. Our lot have to keep putting spells on muggles who've spotted them to make them forget. So what on earth's Hagrid up to, said Hermione. Water, excuse me. Excuse me. When they knocked on the door of the gamekeeper's hut an hour later, they were surprised to see that all the curtains were closed. Hagrid called, "Who is it?" before he let them in and then shut the door quickly behind him. It was stiflingly hot inside. Even though it was such a warm day, there was a blazing fire in the grate. Hagrid made them tea and offered them stout sandwiches, which they refused. "So you wanted to ask me something?" "Yes," said Harry. "There was no point beating around the bush. We were wondering if you could tell us what's guarding the Philosopher's Stone apart from Fluffy." Hagrid frowned at him. "Of course I can't," he said. "Number one, I don't know myself. Number two, you know too much already. I wouldn't tell you if I could. That stone's here for a good reason. It was almost stolen out of Gringotts. I suppose you've worked that out in all this. Beats me how you ever knew about Fluffy." "Oh, come on, Hagrid. You might not want to tell us, but you do know. You know everything that goes on around here," said Hermione in a warm, flattering voice. Hagrid's beard twitched and they could tell he was smiling. "We only wondered who had done the guarding, really," Hermione went on. "We wondered who Dumbledore had trusted enough to help him, apart from you." Hagrid's chest swelled at these last words. Harry and Ron beamed at Hermione. "Well, I don't suppose it could hurt to tell you that. Let's see. He borrowed Fluffy from me, and then some of the teachers did enchantments. Professor Sprout, Professor Flitwick, Professor McGonagall." He ticked them off on his fingers. "Professor Quirrell, and Dumbledore himself did something, of course. Hang on, I've forgotten someone. Oh yeah, Professor Snape." "Snape? Yeah, you're not still on about that, are you? Look, Snape helped protect the stone. He's not about to steal it." Harry knew Ron and Hermione were thinking the same as he was. If Snape had been in on protecting the stone, it must have been easy to find out how the other teachers had guarded it. He probably knew everything, except, it seemed, Quirrell's spell and how to get past Fluffy. "You're the only one who knows how to get past Fluffy, aren't you, Hagrid?" said Harry anxiously. "And you wouldn't tell anyone, would you? Not even one of the teachers." "Not a soul knows except me and Dumbledore," said Hagrid proudly. "Well, that's something," Harry muttered to the others. "Hagrid, can we have a window open? I'm boiling." "Can't." "Harry, sorry," said Hagrid. Harry noticed him glance at the fire. Harry looked at it too. "Hagrid, what's that?" But he already knew what it was. In the very heart of the fire, underneath the kettle, was a huge black egg. "Hagrid. Sorry. Said Hagrid, fiddling nervously with his beard. "That's, Where'd you get it, Hagrid?" said Ron, crouching over the fire to get a closer look at the egg. "It must have cost you a fortune." "I won it," said Hagrid. "Last night. I was down in the village having a few drinks, and I got into a game of cards with a stranger. Think he was quite glad to get rid of it, to be honest." "Well, what are you going to do with it when it's hatched?" said Hermione. "Well, I've been doing some reading," and Hagrid, pulling on a large book from under his pillow, "got this out of the library. Dragons breeding for pleasure and profit. It's a bit out of date, of course, but it's all in here. Keep the egg in the fire because their mothers breathe on them. And when it hatches, feed it in a bucket of brandy mixed with chicken blood every half hour. And see here, how to recognize different eggs. What I got there is a Norwegian Ridgeback. They're rare, them." He looked very pleased with himself, but Hermione didn't. "Hagrid, you live in a wooden house," she said. But Hagrid wasn't listening. He was humming merrily as he stoked the fire. So now that they had something else to worry about, what might happen to Hagrid if anyone found out he was hiding an illegal dragon in his hut? "Wonder what it was like to have a peaceful life," Ron sighed as evening after evening they struggled through all the extra homework they were getting. Hermione had now started making revision timetables for Harry and Ron too. It was driving them mad. Then, one breakfast time, Hedwig brought Harry another note from Hagrid. He had written only 2 words. "It's hatching." Ron wanted to skip herbology and go straight down to the hut. Hermione wouldn't hear of it. "Hermione, how many times in our lives are we going to see a dragon hatching? We've got lessons. We'll get into trouble, and that's nothing to what Hagrid's going to be. And if someone finds out what he's doing, Shut up," Harry whispered. Malfoy was only a few feet away when he had stopped dead to listen. How much had he heard? Harry didn't like the look on Malfoy's face at all. Ron and Hermione argued all the way to herbology, and in the end, Hermione agreed to run down to Hagrid's with the... Did I miss a page? No, I didn't. Ron and Hermione argued all the way to herbology, and in the end, Hermione agreed to run down to Hagrid's with the other 2 during morning break. When the bell sounded from the castle at the end of the lesson, the 3 of them dropped their trowels at once and hurried through the grounds to the edge of the forest. Hagrid greeted them, looking flushed and excited. "It's nearly out," he ushered them inside. The egg was lying on the table. There were deep cracks in it. Something was moving inside. A funny clicking noise was coming from it. They all drew their chairs up to the table and watched with bated breath. All at once, there was a scraping noise and the egg split open. The baby dragon flopped onto the table. It wasn't exactly pretty. Harry thought it looked like a crumpled black umbrella. Its spiny wings were huge compared to its skinny jet body, and it had a long snout with wide nostrils, stubs of horns, and bulging orange eyes. It sneezed. A couple of sparks flew out of its snout. "Isn't he beautiful?" Hagrid murmured. He reached out a hand to stroke the dragon's head. It snapped at his fingers, showing pointed fangs. "Bless him, look, he knows his mummy," said Hagrid. "Hagrid," said Hermione, "how fast do Norwegian ridgebacks grow exactly?" Hagrid was about to answer when the color suddenly drained from his face. He leapt to his feet and ran to the window. "What's the matter?" Someone was looking through the gap in the curtains. "It's a kid. He's running back up to the school." Harry bolted to the door and looked out. Even at a distance, there was no mistaking him. Malfoy had seen the dragon. Something about the smile lurking on Malfoy's face during the next week made Harry, Ron, and Hermione very nervous. They spent most of their free time in Hagrid's darkened hut trying to reason with him. "Just let him go," Harry urged. "Set him free." "I can't," said Hagrid. "He's too little. He'd die." They looked at the dragon. It had grown 3 times in length in just a week. Smoke kept furling out of its nostrils. Hagrid hadn't been doing his gamekeeping duties because the dragon was keeping him so busy. There were empty brandy bottles and chicken feathers all over the floor. "I've decided to call him Norbert," said Hagrid, looking at the dragon with misty eyes. "He really knows me now. Watch. Norbert, Norbert, where's Mummy? Rather. "He's lost his marbles," Ron muttered in Harry's ear. "Hagrid," said Harry loudly, "give it a fortnight and Norbert's going to be as long as your house. Malfoy could go to Dumbledore at any moment." Hagrid bit his lip. "I know I can't keep him forever, but I just can't dump him. I can't." Harry suddenly turned to Ron. "Charlie," he said. "You're losing it too," said Ron. "I'm Ron, remember?" "No, Charlie. Your brother Charlie in Romania studying dragons. We should send Norbert to him. Charlie can take care of him and then put him back in the wild." "Brilliant," said Ron. "How about it, Hagrid?" And in the end, Hagrid agreed that they would send an owl to Charlie to ask him. The following week dragged by. Wednesday night found Hermione and Harry sitting alone in the common room long after everyone else had gone to bed. The clock on the wall had just chimed midnight when the portrait hole burst open. Ron appeared out of nowhere as he pulled off Harry's invisibility cloak. He had been down to Hagrid's hut helping him feed Norbert, who was now eating dead rats by the crate. "It bit me," he said, showing them his hand, which was wrapped in a bloody handkerchief. "I'm not going to be able to hold a quill for a week. I'll tell you, the dragon's the most horrible animal I've ever met." But the way Hagrid goes on about it, you think it was a fluffy little bunny rabbit. "When it bit me, he told me off for frightening it. And when I left, he was singing it a lullaby." There was a tap on the dark window. "It's Hedwig," said Harry, hurrying to let her in. "She'll have Charlie's answer." The 3 of them put their heads together to read the note. Illustrations. "Dear Ron, how are you? Thanks for the letter. I'd be glad to take the Norwegian Ridgeback, but it won't be easy getting him here. I think the best thing will be to send him over with some friends of mine who are coming to visit me next week. Trouble is, they mustn't be seen carrying an illegal dragon. Could you get that Ridgeback up to the tallest tower at midnight on Saturday? They can meet you there and take him away while it's still dark. Send me an answer as soon as possible. Love, Charlie." They looked at each other. "We've got the invisibility cloak," said Harry. "It shouldn't be too difficult. I think the cloak's big enough to cover us and Norbert." It was a mark of how bad the last week had been that the other 2 agreed with him. Anything to get rid of Norbert and Malfoy. There was a hitch. By next morning, Ron's bitten hand had swollen to twice its usual size. He didn't know whether it was safe to go to Madame Pomfrey, which he recognized a dragon bite. By the afternoon, though, he had no choice. The cut had turned a nasty shade of green. It looked as if Norbert's fangs were poisonous. Harry and Hermione rushed up to the hospital wing at the end of the day to find Ron in a terrible state in bed. "It's not just my hand," he whispered, "although that feels like it's about to fall off. Malfoy told Madame Pomfrey he wanted to borrow one of my books so he could come and have a good laugh at me. He kept threatening to tell her what really bit me. I told her it was a dog, but I don't think she believes me. I shouldn't have hit him at the Quidditch match. That's why he's doing this." Harry and Hermione tried to calm Ron down. "It'll all be over at midnight on Saturday," said Hermione, but this didn't soothe Ron at all. On the contrary, he sat bolt upright and broke into a sweat. "Midnight on Saturday," he said in a hoarse voice. "Oh no, I just remembered. Charlie's letter was in that book Malfoy took. He's going to know where we're getting rid of Norbert." Harry and Hermione didn't get a chance to answer. Madame Pomfrey came over at that moment and made them leave, saying Ron needed sleep. "It's too late to change the plan now," Harry told Hermione. "We've got time to send Charlie another owl, and this could be our only chance to get rid of Norbert. We'll have to risk it. And we have got the invisibility cloak. Malfoy doesn't know about that. They found Fang, the boarhound, sitting outside with a bandaged tail when they went to tell Haggard, who opened a window to talk to them. I won't let you in, he puffed. Norbert's at a tricky stage, nothing I can't handle. When they told him about Charlie's letter, his eyes filled with tears, because that might have been because Norbert had just bitten him on the leg. Arg, it's all right, he's only got my boots, just playing, he's only a baby after all. The baby banged its tail on the wall, making the windows rattle. Harry and Hermione walked back to the castle, feeling Saturday couldn't come quickly enough. They would have felt sorry for Hagrid when the time came for him to say goodbye to Norbert if they hadn't been so worried about what they had to do. It was a very dark, cloudy night, and they were a bit late arriving at Hagrid's hut because they had to wait for Peeves to get out of their way in the entrance hall where he'd been playing tennis against the wall. Hagrid had Norbert packed and ready in a large crate. He's got lots of rats and some brandy for the journey, said Hagrid in a muffled voice. And I've packed his teddy bear in case he gets lonely. From inside the crate came ripping noises. It sounded to Harry as though Teddy was having his head torn off. Bye-bye, Norbert, Hagrid sobbed as Harry and Hermione covered the crate with the invisibility cloak and stepped underneath it themselves. Mummy will never forget you. How they managed to get the crate back up to the castle, they never knew. Midnight ticked nearer as they heaved Norbert up the marble staircase in the entrance hall and along the dark corridors, up another staircase, then another. Even one of Harry's shortcuts didn't make the work much easier. Nearly there, Harry panted as they reached the corridor beneath the tallest tower. Then a sudden movement ahead of them made them drop their crate. Forgetting that they were already invisible, they shrank into the shadows, staring at the dark outlines of two people grappling with each other 10 feet away. A lamp flared. Professor McGonagall, in a tartan dressing gown and hairnet, had Malfoy by the ear. "Detention," she shouted, and 20 points from Slytherin, wandering around in the middle of the night. "How dare you? You don't understand, Professor. Harry Potter's coming. He's got a dragon." "What utter rubbish. How dare you tell such lies? Come on, I shall see Professor Snape about you, Malfoy." The steep spiral staircase up to the top of the tower seemed the easiest thing in the world after that. Not until they had stepped out in the cold night air did they throw off the cloak, glad to be able to breathe properly again. Hermione did a sort of jig. "Malfoy's got detention. I could sing." "Don't," Harry advised her. Chuckling about Malfoy, they waited, Norbert thrashing about in his crate. About 10 minutes later, 4 broomsticks came swooping down out of the darkness. Charlie's friends were a cheery lot. They showed Harry and Hermione the harness they'd rigged up so they could suspend Norbert between them. They all helped buckle Norbert safely into it, and then Harry and Hermione shook hands with the others and thanked them very much. At last, Norbert was gone. They slipped back down the spiral staircase, their hearts as light as their hands, now that Norbert was off them. No more dragon, Malfoy in detention. What could spoil their happiness? The answer to that was waiting at the foot of the stairs. As they stepped into the corridor, Filch's face loomed suddenly out of the darkness. Well, he whispered. "We are in trouble." They'd left the invisibility cloak on top of the tower. Well, friends, that was chapter 13 and chapter 14. And that's it for today. It's hard to read out loud for that long. Everybody good? Guys, I'm gonna live stream with somebody for like 30 seconds, and then I'm gonna cut you off and go. So you literally get 30 seconds, but I'm gonna say what up. Oh, you beautiful brat, 1991. Better turn on the light.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Amazing. I didn't actually think I'd get accepted.
Oh, well, you did. I got like 30 seconds. So well, first of all, who are you?
My name is Samantha.
Hey, Samantha, I'm Matt.
Yeah, I know.
Pleasure to meet you.
Same. I haven't seen you guys live yet. I can't wait till you guys do go live.
That's okay. It's probably for your own good.
No. Not allowed.
No?
Y'all are my favorite band.
Oh, thank you so much. Sam, whereabouts do you live?
Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Come, please.
Oh, man, that would be sweet. I would love to be traveling anywhere right now. It would be awesome. South Dakota? Why not?
That would be great. I would love it. I'll get VIP.
Okay. How did you hear about our band?
Actually, through a former friend of mine,
Yeah.
originally.
Yeah.
Kind of screwed up. So I couldn't listen to you guys' music for a long time, and then I started getting into it again, and you guys took over a favorite band after 17 years of having the same one. So.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Well, I
Yeah.
can't
I'm
listen
an
to her.
aspiring vocalist myself, so you guys have been really helpful.
Oh, well, thanks. That's very flattering. What are you
Just the truth.
what are you up to on this Sunday afternoon or evening, I guess?
Well, after this, I plan on going and seeing my kids and spending time with them, and after that, probably work.
Amazing. That's awesome. Well, Sam, I'm so sorry. I really do have to cut this short today. I apologize, but it's really awesome to say hello. Thanks very much for
Yeah,
tuning in
thank you.
today.
Have a great day. Wow, I can talk.
You too. Yeah, thank you. And you have a wonderful evening, and I hope you have a lovely time with your family and working life.
Always, always.
All right. Well, have a great day.
You too.
Okay, see you
Bye.
around. Ciao. Sorry, guys, that was so quick. I apologize, but I wanted to get more reading in today because I screwed you guys the last couple of weeks. Next week should be back. I don't know. We'll see. Anyways, have a great afternoon, and love you all so much. Hope you guys are well.